Eric. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me,
I
Corey.
appreciate it.
Yeah.
So we met in some health and wellness networking things. This is a very new space for me, but you've been around it a while, right?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
How did you get into it, health and wellness wise? And we don't have to start with, I know I jokingly said young Eric, but
Yeah. Jump into all the traumas immediately.
Yeah.
Let's just Dr. Phil it.
right. What got you into this space? And was there something on your journey that was like, man, this is enough's enough, or I'm going to start this modality, or?
Yeah, absolutely. In my mid-20s, despite the fact that I was going to the gym, I was eating super healthy, I felt terrible. I had chronic fatigue, I had bloating, I was sleeping poorly. I mean, there were times where I was like, I feel like death, and so I was trying to do all the physical things right just because, I just knew inherently that I like to feel good, go to the gym, eat healthy food. But I realized I needed to dig deeper. And so just through some self-development, I stumbled upon a curriculum that offered basically a health coaching certification, a whole course. And so I took that. It blended a combination of both the physical, the emotional, the mental, and even the spiritual. And that's really what I was sort of missing in a nutshell, was I was trying to master the physical, but I wasn't exploring these other elements that would make a more comprehensive, well-rounded, holistic, healthy version of myself.
So neglecting the other parts. It's funny because I had a guest on recently that just talked about too, like when people say whole body health, it's not head to toe. It's like mind, body, spirit.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it really is a deal, right? Because like stress and other things can manifest themselves in physical ways.
Yes.
So is that kind of what you were running across? Because mid-20s is not a time to be feeling like that unless you have some sort of degenerative disease.
No, mine was just purely inflicted from just a trauma that was coming up in life, and it was very much affecting me on the mental, emotional level, and I didn't have like the coping mechanisms, the skill sets, the healthy, modalities to go to like work through that stuff, right? So it's like, I find that the physical, it's usually where we start, and it's so important, but it's also sometimes where the manifestation of what's already going on a mental, emotional, spiritual level shows up. So it's like not treating those areas like up there, you can treat what's almost like symptomatic, like down here, the body's a really great feedback loop, but without like going to the source of that, like it becomes almost, to me, impossible to like be a fully, well-rounded individual. I do see some people, they just master their physical health and they're fine, but I seem to notice that they already kind of had a pretty good emotional, mental foundation. They didn't have to like work through so many kinks in the hose, if you will.
Yeah, I've kind of used it as a stair step. When I was going through depression not too long ago, I had to kind of put one foot in front of the other, and the getting into the physical part of it helped me get to a point where I was lacking something. And so then I got into the mental part of it. And I believe we've discussed this briefly, maybe not, but it's a clean house analogy to me. So this is my theory was that, so I sat down and I was not comfortable in my home. I had an unexpected guest. One of my sons got into it with like another kid in the neighborhood, and the mother basically followed him into my front door. And I remember at that time thinking like, man, my house is kind of a mess, and not like spaghetti plates on the floor or anything, but like, like Nerf darts and clutter.
Sure.
And so I thought to myself, right after she had left, I went to clean things up, and I was like, man, this feels better. And I knew that part, but so the next day I cleaned up a little more different things to where day 7 or 8, I was like wiping down baseboards and wiping windows and stuff. And so I had been working out a little bit at that time, and just a little bit every day. So I added to both of those aspects, and I'm like, man, what else could I do? Because I'm sad at this time too, right? So self-affirmation is what I added to that for my mind. I started really making a point of not only going to church, but listening to the Bible on audio. And whether you're spiritual or whatever it is, everybody might have their own modality for that. But basically what I've come to the conclusion of is when I'm living purposefully daily, and it's that 5% thing, right? Like to get 100% of yourself, you don't need to to increase 80% of one thing. 5% every day of those little things starts adding up.
Absolutely. I agree.
So how did you find that space in your modality? Where did you start with one or the other? Or?
Yeah, definitely. Like I was very stubborn, like with the physical, where through my research, I was finding out there was these other components, but I just had this belief, this story that I was like, no, I have to master whatever's going on with me physically before I open Pandora's box to these other areas, which unfortunately was really just sort of a pseudo comfort zone that was keeping me stuck, because while I was trying to figure that stuff out, it was keeping me at a really low energy state where if I would have like done anything, like including, just like the deep cleaning of the house, right?
Yeah.
Like that would have helped things go better. And what was difficult about my experience too was like, because in general, there is a great rule of thumb for depression where it's like, hey, just get up and do something positive and productive. So in the situation I found myself in, of like having such low energy, over time I had to like come up with an exercise for myself, like what do I do when I'm not feeling energetic? And so that was really just becoming a witness of the thoughts that I was having in my head that were negative and kind of more treating it like a commercial, like on like a TV going on in the background. It's like it's trying to advertise, it's trying to sell you on something, but it's like I don't want it. So I'm just I'm gonna hear it, but I'm not gonna like listen to it. And so that was like really helpful for me because I stopped believing that like I was my thoughts like fully.
So like, you mean like you were really? Oh man, how would I break that down? Like feeling that moment, getting inside that moment.
Yeah, it's just really being present and kind of like being the observer. This concept of like it gets
almost out of body a little bit, like
maybe a little bit.
Why am I feeling this way?
It's a little bit more. It's a little bit of a mind trip, but it's this like kind of esoteric thing. Like who are we really? Are we our minds? Are we our thoughts? Are we our stories? Or, is that just a component, of us? Because it's like, we do live out our thoughts, that creates our stories, our behaviors and that. So like being able to like witness them and kind of be like, nope, that's junk. I'm not going to fall for that. Kind of allowed me to not fall into those like mental depressive pits and stay there as long, because it was like I maybe didn't need to do XYZ things like for a week or for hours to like pull myself like out of the rut. Like all those things would help for a sustainable future to not go back there. But like in that present moment, like what do you do when it feels like you're kind of like handcuffed? It's just being like, okay, I'm having these thoughts, but like I can just observe them.
Anyway.
Yeah. It's just like witnessing it and just being like okay, because usually it's like we have a thought and then it produces a feeling, right?
Okay.
But like in this essence of
I've always looked at it the other way. Well, I don't know that I've always looked at it anyway, but oftentimes when you say it out loud, I'm like, man, am I thinking terrible things because I'm feeling sad?
It depends. Like I've heard it described as there's a difference between feelings and emotions, that emotions is just like emoting, like it's energy in motion, like at this idea that everything's just like ultimately made up of energy, right? Like emotions are meant to just be felt. Like if we really surrender to them and felt them and didn't label them or judge them with the mind, they tend to pass within like 15 to 17 seconds. But it's actually where the mind gets involved and starts meddling with the labels, the stories, the beliefs, that we start to kind of convolute things a little bit. And then to me, feeling is like where, we have a thought, we believe it, and then it makes us feel a certain way. So it's kind of like, it can go kind of like both ways.
Yeah. Well, I like that because that kind of makes sense to something I was reading about recently about it's a lot of times people with anger issues, I've experienced this, it's easier to be angry than sad, but sadness is a better feeling than anger because it's a feeling, it's not an emotion. So emotion, rage, I call it. Rage is an emotion that you're acting out. You're emoting.
Right.
But sadness is a feeling.
Right.
So oftentimes, especially as men, I think that And as young men, like you were saying in your 20s, you were having some issues with this stuff, and I certainly did in my 20s. We don't want to be hourly sad,
Sure.
or we don't want to feel sad. And the feeling of sadness, I'll speak solely for myself. The feeling of sadness made me angry.
Mm-hmm.
I was angry that I was sad because that felt, I wouldn't say effeminate, but it felt like, well, man up, because that was the old school mentality, man up. And it's been a fine line of walking between, and I would love to hear you speak on that because you're a pretty masculine guy, it's like, it's a fine line between our generation of where we came up to where it was a man up mentality versus now it's okay not to be okay, but there could still be masculinity surrounding that.
Sure.
The same way that Fred Astaire doesn't look dainty when he's dancing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So like, he was still very manly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But what, did you have any experience with that or battle with that? Or I have those thoughts?
Absolutely. I feel like, even as men, and same thing applies to women, to me, like we all still have a masculine, feminine kind of energy, within us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like masculine for me was like, I got to get here on time. I'm going to be a minute late, The feminine was, I got to take a shower. I got to get my hair, looking on point, stuff like that. So for me, it was kind of like, I think to go back to the emotion, like feeling thing, it's like, it can show up a little bit as like that weak masculinity where it's like you need to show up when we start like ruminating, in our thoughts and we kind of get into a pity party thing. But I think there is a way for that masculine energy to kind of be courageous and strong and almost go into this inner battlefield of like, okay, I've been through hardships. I've been through stuff in my life. I've been through stresses. This is something you and I can relate on, right? Where it's like, we go through relationship stuff. And so it's like one of those things where if we can be strong and actually just allow ourselves to just feel whatever's coming up in the present moment, there's almost like this alchemical process, like turning lead into gold, where instead of suppressing, repressing what's going on deeper inside of us that tends to make men like moody or angry, that those emotions are allowed to be felt. Now, finding safe, ways to do it, safe people to speak to, it can be difficult to sometimes dump this on like a romantic partner because then it's almost like asking her to be mom or something. As men, we do have this like very intense energy that sometimes wants to vent frustration and anger. And so it's like finding, safe places to do it. Is it the gym? Is it, hitting a punching bag? Is it doing a sweat lodge? It's like there's all types of just different healthy ways to kind of like release that stuff.
I noticed that was helpful for me is, and another thing, again, all this stuff is learned. I mean, I guess none of us are born with the knowledge of how to overcome these things, so that's kind of a moot point to make, but I only emphasize that because sometimes I don't ever want to come off like I'm an expert. Sometimes people like juice for like a month and they're like, wait, you're not juicing? Like you don't know all the benefits of juicing? It's like, are you a dietitian? So, but for me, I had been reading about, and then so that was the practice that I took on about living in that feeling and that emotion. Mm-hmm. We as men tend to take longer to get over breakups or relationships or loss of job.
Yeah.
Because we distract ourselves to not feel sad.
Yes.
Women tend to, they get hit harder initially, but they get over it much quicker because they live in that feeling. They allow themselves to feel it.
Yes.
Whereas we're like, not to contradict what you're saying, but I think like maybe to piggyback on it is our tendency is go to the gym, forget about it, dive into work.
100%.
Create a new hobby, start dating again, whatever the case is. And then we're like, man, a year later we still have these tings of pain and regret or whatever else. And we're like, why can't I get over this? And it's like, because you haven't dealt with it yet.
Yeah. Been there, done that, got the t-shirt.
Yeah.
It took me several breakups in my adult life to stop rebounding to the next relationship, just hitting the gym, just focusing on, basically this, how can I improve my reality on the outside to insulate myself from those feelings or make myself feel better about my worth if I felt any sense of disappointment or rejection from, what was happening there. And yeah, what it brings up is this kind of concept that for a man, it's like ego, identity, I'm a man, but to surrender to the chaos of what we may be feeling inside that can feel like a threat to our identity, our ego, you know, like to the mind, it can feel like facing death almost, like in the present, you know, moment where you're kind of just like surrendering, waving the white flag, like, okay, whatever I need to experience in this moment right now, I'm not going to try to fight it. I'm not going to try to push it aside and then go conquer this mountain instead. So it's like finding which cycle of like life that we're in. I think the easiest way to tell in my experience is if we have the energy, the passion, the vitality, you know, we feel like we're firing almost on all cylinders, then it's like, yeah, go out and achieve stuff. But we feel like we're trudging and slugging and sloshing through things, and we're just like the wounded warrior that's just like trying to get through the day. That's usually when there's a time to dive, you know, deeper and do some type of therapeutic emotional processing work on self.
You know, did you do a lot of like talk therapy? Like, were you?
Not very
very
limited amounts. I've actually been doing more lately. It's really interesting because I kind of like was doing a lot of different, more alternative, you know, modalities. You know, like sound baths were one of them. You know, Reiki was one. You know, just basically doing these like more spiritual based like energy things. And so I find myself actually now rebalancing and using a little bit more like Western modalities. I've been doing talk therapy. Actually just did my first ever EMDR session yesterday.
EMDR, what's this?
It stands
I've heard
for,
this a couple times.
Yeah, what I looked it up earlier because I'm like,
Is that a sound wave thing?
it stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing.
Eye movement.
And so it's this idea that like the optical nature of the eyes, like, you know, is connected to the brain, and where these memories, these traumas, these challenges in the past, you know, are stored. And so you're sitting with a qualified therapist, and so they're talking to you about these memories, but then they'll literally like play like this like TikTok sound, and you'll like look at a couple like post-it notes on the wall, and you just like go like this back and forth, and you will literally start like processing through the brain and like letting it go. I'm not an expert. I don't know exactly how it works, but that's kind of
When
the
you say that, I feel like
practicality.
I've seen something about with the stress levels, maybe on like a podcast. What's that one guy that I watched often? Andrew. Sam, do you remember the Andrew guy we were talking about not long ago? Hummel?
Oh, Huberman?
Huberman.
I'm not familiar.
Well, I think he had somebody on there who was talking about this. And I could be wrong, so don't, if you're fact checking me, just put down the correct answer. I wanted to bash us online. But there was something about that where this guy had been studying stress levels for a long time. And you can tell by the way your eye moves or rattles, like, same as like what they do with the DUI or something, when they're checking you, whatever. It's not necessarily they're watching, they don't really care about you following the light. They're watching to see if your pupil shakes while it's trying to move. Because if it's shaking, it's stressed. Because it's not about having a hard time following it. It's what level of pressure or stress that your eye's under.
There's nothing stressful about a police officer doing that to you, right?
Everything about those tests, I couldn't pass sober. I never understood that. Well, maybe like the walking in the line. Even then, it could be difficult. But the alphabet thing was the one that always blew my mind. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know that when I was. Probably my most proficient time of knowing the alphabet would be like a year after I learned it.
Sure.
But I don't think at 7 you could have been like, start with Q. And I'd have been like,
Yeah.
you know.
Yep.
Or especially when they're up in the ones you don't think about. Like, I don't know, there's only 26 of them, but still, start with H, whatever it is. I don't see myself being real proficient at that.
I get it. I can concur on my end.
I still have to do the months by my fingers.
Yeah.
Not all of them, because like my birthday, my son's birthdays, like I know important months by the number now because I've written them out so many times. But
Yeah.
if I'm trying to figure out what April is, I count that out.
Yeah.
I'm like, February, March, April. For the longest time, my youngest son's born in March, and I used to put 4 for his thing. It's actually 3
Yeah.
because I wasn't counting it out.
I've heard that March is the 3rd month.
Yeah. According to some people.
Yeah.
Depends on if you're using the Mayan calendar or not, I guess.
Right.
So what do you practice now? Because I know you have a men's group, but you also have What do you practice as far as modalities now? Do you teach and then, or are you just participating in? Because you were.
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. It's being okay with being the student and the teacher at the same time.
Okay.
Like I have my offerings that I do, as a coach to support others. It's both men and women, but I tend to think of things as like we'd never really become like this ascended master, guru, where we don't have to like work on ourselves. And it's kind of like a snake, it sheds its skin, but eventually that new skin that forms, it's going to shed it again in a new cycle, right?
That's a cool way to
There's
look at it,
always
yeah.
going to be these cycles of like where we're going more out and we're doing things, and then where we're more like going within and releasing. And you can even look at this in the seasons a little bit too. Sometimes like winter sometimes tends to be a time of going within a little bit more, like it's cold out, there's some limited social activities, there's holidays and stuff. We're still doing business stuff and our family stuff, but like things are more quiet, they're more still. So, that's kind of like how I treat it. So for me, like I was really trying to find myself like around this time when my both mental health and just overall health was like suffering. And so as I finally started to dive down those rabbit holes of like the mental, emotional, spiritual, I eventually stumbled upon a plant medicine called ayahuasca. It has dimethyltryptamine in it, which is what some people refer to as the spirit molecule. It's something that gets released at low doses when there's like oxytocin present, so like love making or the birth of a newborn child, there's just like, whoa, like, very miracle-like events. And so this plant medicine that tends to be indigenous to places like Peru, like you go on this like spiritual, almost like hallucinogenic type journey. And so you start to really see what you're suffering from. It's like a medicine, like you see those different things. And so that for me produced what some people refer to as like a spiritual awakening, where it was like, whoa, like my old way of how I identified as this, construction project manager, very left brain analytical guy, trying to solve his health purely in the physical, was like, okay, now I'm feeling like I have intuition, like I'm feeling more of a sensitivity towards other human beings, right? Like there was just these other things that started to happen. And so I started studying things like astrology, just like how do the cosmos like affect and influence events and people here on Earth. Eventually, I was in an ayahuasca ceremony where I wasn't able to deal with like what I was feeling like really well, and I was like, gosh, like I feel like I need a new tool or something. And so that actually led me to going and doing some breathwork training, where it was like, oh, it's like when we're in fight or flight response, we're feeling the most uncomfortable. It's like one of the easiest ways to start to self-regulate that fight or flight response in our central nervous system is our breath. So I learned different techniques
Even
for
while
breath
on
work.
ayahuasca?
So yeah, you can use it for that. Like it's like there's not, I wouldn't do the one that I use for people that's more of like a therapeutic style to help them, release traumas. Like during an ayahuasca ceremony, it would be more like maybe like a box breathing, like something that I think that
Because these are often guided, correct? I've heard
it depends
a lot about these. I don't know. I'm very ignorant on the process.
Some of them are like there's like levels. There's like this very therapeutic trauma informed one where you need a facilitator, but there's also other ones that people can literally just be taught and build into their daily practice just to keep themselves regulated. And there's ones that can be taught when you're having, a flight response.
No, are you talking about the breath part?
Yes.
I'm talking about is the breathing effective on ayahuasca during that journey?
Yeah,
Is
absolutely.
That part's guided?
Oh, so they don't do breath work during those journeys,
Okay.
but yeah. So
So how do you come back down if
self-regulated.
you're not regulating? Because I've not done ayahuasca.
Sure.
I've talked to a lot of people that have.
Yeah.
I've not heard really bad things about it. The one thing that I've heard repetitively is you're going to go to the hospital, to church, and to hell all at once.
Yeah.
And you're going to battle through some things. And if you let go, it becomes a great journey. But if you're fighting while you're in the midst of it, it can be a very difficult battle
1,000%.
for several hours.
Yeah. I've seen both ends of it. I've
Yeah.
experienced both ends of it.
I've done mushrooms.
Yeah.
I've
same.
never done acid.
Mm-hmm.
I was always afraid of synthetic drugs. But I've had experiences there where, and I'm sure that this might be, I guess everything's relative, so I shouldn't downplay my experiences, but there was a big difference between doing it with setting an intention and going into it versus doing it recreational as a kid,
100%.
right? And recreational as a kid, there was a really just one time that I had a bad experience with that. And I've only probably done it a handful of times, less than 10 for sure. But I remember the one experience, I was sitting next to a friend, probably not much farther than you and I were apart. We were watching a movie or something, and there was a big thing going on upstairs, like all these puppet shows and laser lights and this big barn thing. And I was like, I don't know, I'm not ready for that experience. I'm going to go watch this film.
Yeah.
I was watching like Red Dawn or something, like the original. And it seemed like every 10 seconds, maybe 30 minutes, I couldn't tell the time. It was happening often. And I kept going, like that. And my buddy's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, dude, I keep forgetting to breathe. And he's like, you've got to remember to do that. And that was just mushrooms.
Yeah.
So I've always had this fear of like the ayahuasca journey. When I've heard about it, I'm like, well, I don't want to be near a body of water.
Sure. I get that.
Like,
yeah.
like there was always a fear on mushrooms that I was like gonna drown.
Yeah.
And I feel like if I go in there with that in my intentional mind and I don't have that misplaced or guided out, that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy at some point on these journeys. I don't know why that's such a stigma in my brain.
Sure.
But that has held me back from joining because I've been invited a couple times.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so important with the ayahuasca because it takes you so deep into yourself for there to be qualified facilitators and enough support too, because like the best ayahuasca ceremonies I've been in, it's not just a shaman doing it with you, that's like trained in like journeying on these medicines, but they have someone that's also not on the medicine that's there to support and help people as needed, because I mean, also just physiologically, the medicine is caustic to the stomach. So this isn't very inviting for anyone listening to try it, but it's like you're either going to vomit it up or you're going to go to the bathroom.
Right.
So.
And that was my secondary largest, actually that's my primary largest fear is being incontinent in front of strangers.
I've seen it happen.
Yeah, but people have also told me, they're like, well, for the most part, you'll have time to get there, or somebody can help you get there. Like, it's not going to be like whatever, but it is a rush. Like, you'll feel it. Like, you may not have time.
Yeah, it happens. It's one of those things where, a lot of people refer to it as like a container. It's like, okay, in this container, in this ceremony that we're doing, there's no judgment. It's just unconditional love. So it's like whatever happens. We're just going to keep everyone safe. Let everyone have their process. We'll integrate. We'll talk about things afterwards. Usually the next day, right? Because it's like you're on that medicine. Even if you took it during the day, which most people do it during the evening, just because you need to kind of sleep some of that off afterwards. So.
And the ones I've been invited to are always actually 3 days.
Yeah.
So there's a dieta,
Dieta, yeah.
right? Which is just what Spanish for diet. Like there's you're basically right? So like you eat a certain way for like several weeks leading up to it, right?
Yeah.
To kind of cleanse and prepare yourself.
Yeah.
So does that purge thing always happen though? Because here's why I ask. I've heard about purging on mushrooms too, and a lot of people do. Never once have I done that. Now what happens to me is, and apparently this is a form of purging, I yawn uncontrollably and a lot.
Yeah.
I just go into, there's probably, let's call it 45 minutes in, for maybe 15 minutes or so. I'm just the biggest yawns, continuous yawns, yawning, and just taking in oxygen to my brain. And so I've never purged vomiting wise or otherwise, but I have on mushrooms had yawning every time. That's a consistent thing for me.
That's a common one for me as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, with ayahuasca, I have seen people that do have difficulty purging. A lot of times shamans will work with like tobacco with them. They'll either have them like smoke some tobacco to get some energy moving, or they'll blow tobacco smoke on them. It's just something that's meant to help them release. I did a ceremony with a guy where he only purged like one time in like the whole weekend of like we did 2 ceremonies. So everyone's a little bit different. But yeah, it's really interesting. It's like mileage may vary. Everyone has a different experience. Yeah.
Now in tobacco, that's interesting you bring that up because tobacco has, in the cigarette form and chew and all sorts of such a huge stigma. But from my understanding, different regions, places, or continents or whatever have their own like tie-ins. There's different spirits with the plants, like dandelions or all these other things, right? And tobacco is like the granddaddy of all the plant spirits, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think here with like cigarettes and things like that, it's like you start mixing in nicotine, and then with the manufacturing process, like anytime there's a manufacturing process, it brings into question, has this been tested for heavy metals, which is a whole nother thing for our health, right? So, when there's an actual just like more organic, process of like they're going straight from the plant to
a dried tobacco leaf without additives.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so it can have a very sacred use, absolutely.
I guess that could be like the difference of when you really look at it as like eating a tomato from your grandmother's garden versus like buying Heinz ketchup with, buying ketchup from the store. I don't know. Wouldn't it be funny if like Heinz cared enough about my little ass show that they're like, cancel it?
Right.
But the difference between like eating a tomato from the garden and eating ketchup with like 75 ingredients. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's well put.
And then there's another one that I'm curious about. I've done this a couple times. I really enjoyed this experience. And it was weird because like going into it, very skeptical that it would do anything because it's primarily tobacco based. And that's rape.
Yeah.
Am I saying? There's another word for it though.
Hape.
Oh, is that
the
what
other
it
one.
is? Okay.
Well, I call it rape. Some people call it hape. I sometimes think people that call it hape are a little bit stuck up in the air. So I call it rape.
Like Tarjay.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that was cool because like the first time I did that, I was with 2 people that I didn't know that well yet.
Yeah.
And I remember being like, they were both like, yeah, let's do this. They turn off the lights. They're like cleansing the space. They've turned on this music, this like trance music. And I'm like, hold on, man. Because this is way before I got into like my yes mode of heal however I can.
Sure.
And so I'm in an action stance under the table. Like, they didn't know that, but like my feet are like this. Like I'm ready to move or like.
Yeah.
And so they both do it, and then it gets to me, and I'm like, you hold it next to your chest, and you set your intention, right? And for those of you who don't know, it's like I would say it's almost exactly like a check mark shape, right? And so you put one end in your mouth, and you blow the stuff up into your nose, and it's like tobacco and some other plant. It's like a plant.
Yeah.
There's different mixtures.
Right.
And so the first time I did it, I really wasn't ready, and I was still nervous about who these people were. Like, am I going to pass out on this? What's going on? So I did it, but the second nostril or whatever it was, it was like, only way I can describe it is like an electrical tree that I could feel. Like I could feel the lightning, and not in a painful way, but I could feel like electricity, like branching through my head.
Yeah.
And I started to go into this place, and my intention at the time was about a relationship. This was years ago, and I was like going through this, but I didn't really give in. So we did it 2 more rounds. Second and third round. Second round, I'm cool with it. So I give a full blow. I pull the thing up. And I'm really into it. And that second round, I used it to play around in my brain. I was like, okay, what can I make a color over here, or can I watch this do something? And so I'm just kind of getting to know it. And the third one, man, I was really in my intention, and it was, I described it to everyone as a pamphlet. So this experience that I set out to have visually was centerfold, and it was being the vocalization. Like I was watching myself and this other person have a conversation here, but I was hearing it in this panel, and I was watching it be scribed in this panel. And like I was walking through it, and what it helped me do was like, there's certain thoughts or traumas or different things where I get to a certain point in the thought process of it, and I'm like, I don't want to think about that right now. But in this case, I was like, push through that wall. Let's get to the other part of this conversation that I'm watching myself have while I'm listening to myself have it and reading myself have it. kind of nuts.
That feels like that was a very masterful experience that you had. Like going to the other side, it reminds me of the Truman Show a little bit. You know, like Jim Carrey's like living in this like dome, and someone's like narrating his life for him, but it's like, who's the narrator? And he's like determined. I don't care if I got to push through to the other side of that ocean to get to that door and that wall and go out there and see what else is out there. Which in that movie was romance. Go figure. But yeah.
Who was the guy in that?
Ed Harris.
Ed Harris.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's funny. He wore that Kangol hat.
Yeah.
I'd forgotten about that movie. It's a good movie. Yeah, it was a cool experience for something that's like completely natural and not like, something that's traditionally hallucinogenic or anything. It was pretty neat.
Yeah.
So I've started to kind of enjoy those times.
Yeah. I've sat with rape quite often, and you're right, they do make different blends of it. And it's this tobacco stuff, and, you'll have a different experience, every time. If anything, I had to, because I really believe anything can become, addictive. It may not be like chemically addictive, but we just form this belief that we need, some crutch. And so I had to kind of like back off of it at times. It's not addictive in itself. It's more so just, I found myself anytime I was feeling uncomfortable, I would go just do like a self-administration, and that wasn't always what I needed. Maybe I just needed to go for a walk, because like just going for a walk around the neighborhood is good for our health, like doing some jumping jacks or burpees, going to the gym, making, smoothies, some food, something like that. But it has, it definitely works on like both hemispheres of the brain. And, they say that I try not to screw this up because I know it, but I feel like I'm going to say it wrong. But it's like more of that left side of the brain is more the logical side, but the hemispheres of the brain actually kind of like crisscross to the other side of the body. So that logical masculine side is more the right side of the body, and then more of that feminine, abstract, intuitive, feely, touchy side of things, right side, and it corresponds to the left side of the body. So in doing the left nostril, that would correspond to the right hemisphere of the brain, and then the right nostril will correspond to the left hemisphere of the brain. So it's like been a really interesting process to have that contrast of what do I experience when I administer in one nostril versus the other.
That's kind of neat. Yeah, I didn't think of it that way because we did both all 3 times.
Sure. Yeah, and
but I wonder if it's even about how
both.
you start.
Yeah, someone suggested to me that you start with the opposite
of your dominant
energy
hand?
of your gender, actually. So like if this abstract intuitive side's more of a feminine part of our brain and we're men, they would say actually start with the left side. So I started doing that. I started having more my experiences were a little bit more comfortable starting with that side, and I was able to understand what I was experiencing a little bit better. The other way felt a little chaotic.
Okay.
This was interesting.
And now, if I recall, too, this because I've only sat with it. Did I do it twice? Maybe twice. It was like 8 minutes tops. It wasn't like
Yeah.
I wasn't under this spell for hours
Yeah, it's
at a time.
not like mushrooms or ayahuasca where you're on it for hours. Yeah.
And the group I sat with, we all had we had a, and it probably because it was maybe tied into something, like if I'm looking at it scientifically, a noise happened outside or whatever else. But we all, when we were sharing, we were all like, hey, did you feel like there was a giant walking around the room? And it was like, yeah, like for this person it was a giant, for this person it was a monster. Like we all felt a large presence, like enter the home, walk around us.
Yeah.
And do that. And we all had that experience while doing it at the same time. Like around the same time during the experience.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that was because it was associated with the noise, but for us to all experience it in that way, it was almost like a shared dream.
Yeah.
Have you ever had anything
absolutely
like that happen?
Yeah, like being on a spiritual journey, what's fascinating for me is that I didn't do like a ton of reading about things. Like I would do some, but
I went in completely blind.
Yeah, I would have certain experiences, and then I would go and talk to people that would say they're having a similar experience in life or a similar, belief. But it's like I didn't go like read into that belief, and so I feel like some of that taps into this concept of like a collective consciousness, of like a oneness aspect, that we're all connected. The Avatar movies kind of do an interesting symbolism of connecting that really well. And so I think some of it's that, especially when you're on these type of, plant medicines. Some people call it like thinning the veil of like reality, where you start to tap into more of those intuitive sixth senses and, the unseen of things. And so then you're able to interpret that energy and then speak to that. And then people can be like, whoa, yeah, I'm experiencing that too.
I think maybe it's because your brain's not trying to make sense of it.
Right.
When you're letting things go and you're just existing, it's
Yeah.
different. Like when we see things, so oftentimes when people talk about seeing spirits or ghosts or whatever, it's because faces are what we recognize the most. So if we see an object, a shape, we're looking at fire, we're looking at smoke, we're looking at things. Our mind's always trying to make sense of what we're seeing. And so oftentimes we'll see a face or we'll see a body or we'll see a silhouette.
Right.
And so I'm curious, and there may be something like this out there, but I'm getting this just from what you said. I wonder if there's some tie-in to where that uniformness, because I've read recently too about fauna all being connected, flora all being connected in a way. Like mushrooms decide where things grow and how things die.
The mycelium web.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so but with trees and plants and everything, so like the Avatar is a good example of that. So I wonder if it's because there's no conscious thought within the other living beings, but they're living beings. So even if there's no brain, there's alive. Or you take like an amoeba that moves around. That's like that's a one cell organism, but it moves. So it's not like a tree.
Yeah.
So it's in existence and it has a purpose. Like it procreates and then dies. So I wonder if that's when these plant modalities, why there's such a connection between people that are doing it, is because it's a subconscious plane. It's a level of existence
Absolutely.
without a need to make sense of it.
Absolutely. Yeah, like even like, it's like the plant behind you is a great example, or like a seashell. It's like there always seems to be this like sacred geometry of like patterns and things too, where it's just like,
Especially at the micro level.
yeah, it's just like ever unfolding, right? Where it's just this geometry that continues to show itself, and there's like a connection, but then it brings up these existential questions of like, what is the origin? What is the source of the consciousness of this thing? And like even how you look out into nature, and it's like, without any tampering of like humans, like it's like perfect organized chaos, like even just like the animal kingdom, or like the marine kingdom of like the shark eats this fish and this fish eats this algae or whatever.
Right.
So
Yeah, microsystems.
Yeah.
Ecosystems, micro ecosystems
Yeah.
versus a macro, because it's all tiny versions of a larger existence,
yeah,
right? Because like you get big enough, kind of like that one
Right.
song, from a distance the world looks blue and green,
yeah.
but as you get closer, there's always pieces like a mosaic.
Yeah. What I love too about like this conversation flow is like this type of thing. I think how it feeds into mental health is that, to that identification of thoughts piece, like when you start like looking at these like bigger pictures, it gives an opportunity to kind of like think bigger and transcend outside sometimes that mental suffering, to see there is options for like research to see like what is the greater totality of things and these paths for healing and wellness, but then also just to like another way to learn and see ourselves, like as well. Like we go and we have experiences that shape us, that shape our beliefs and our stories, and that tends to change us too. And I even find like with health, like that our health tends to be a condition of our identity. Like when we're feeling strong in who we are, what we're doing, we're very know the path that we're on, like our health is good. And I think that's why sometimes you hear these stories, and I think mine was one of them, where people, they get sick, they get ill, and they're forced to slow down because they're actually being called into this like cocooning, this, you're going to become this caterpillar version that can only wiggle around because you're meant to emerge as this butterfly, this new version of yourself. And so if you're out and you're just constantly doing things and you can't slow down, you can't go into that re-identification because you're still acting as that old self and like going in that direction. Like I think it was even Jim Carrey said that depression, because we brought him up earlier, right? That depression is when you're tired of playing the same character over and over and over again. You're ready for a reset.
Well, it kind of goes back into what we were saying too about the way we feel things. If we don't allow ourselves to stop and feel that feeling,
Yeah.
and we keep distracting ourselves.
Yeah.
So it is almost like, and whether that's 20 minutes or 2 weeks, there's a cocoon phase in each part of our evolution where we're coming out, but maybe more dynamic than just caterpillar to butterfly. It might be, butterfly to butterfly to butterfly to butterfly. Like we're
Yeah.
constantly going through that, or shedding the skin. if you will.
Ideally. Yeah.
There's a book I read called The Knight's Rusty Armor.
I'm not familiar.
We'll put a link to The Knight's Rusty Armor in the book.
Along with Heinz Ketchup.
And Heinz Ketchup. big shout out to Heinz Ketchup and then Knight's Rusty Armor. But it basically talks about this knight, and he's got this armor, and everything he knows is about slaying dragons and other things, and he's neglecting his family,
Yeah.
but he's also neglecting his feelings. And so as he starts taking this away and peeling this off, like he has to go on this journey. And when I translated that book, it's a very easy read too, like big letters, like you could read it in a week, very super easy, like in your spare time. But it's so profound. And maybe that's why it's profound, it's the simplicity.
Yeah.
But as you shed this ego and you shed these defenses, that's when true confidence happens, because you're getting to the core of realism. And so it's like pausing to do these things. One of the practices I found to be very beneficial is, I don't know that I ever will or ever want to not have days where I'm a little sad, I'm a little worried, I'm a little stressed. I give myself time limits. I think you and I discussed. I write them down. What can I do today? What can I do this week, this month, this year? Do that. But I just give myself time. I'm like, all right, I'm feeling sad. I'm going to let myself feel this. But in 15 minutes, I got to get back to work. So let's write down why I'm feeling sad. Can I do anything about this sadness? Let's write that down if there is something I can do. I can do some push-ups, even if it's something like that I know I can do. Push-ups. Well, I try making my bed. Check those things off, do those things, and then back to my business.
Yeah.
But I live in those moments.
Yeah.
I just can't dwell in those moments.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. 100%.
Like I got to go across the quicksand. I don't have to stand there.
Yeah.
And
No,
sink.
I love it. It's great because it feels like we each have our like unique approach, right? Like mine's like, oh, it's just a commercial. I'll just listen to it until I kind of detach from it.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, let me just face this, give it some time. Like it's like listening to, maybe it's like the equivalent to like listening to a child throw a tantrum. A little bit.
wear
like,
itself out.
Like, okay, like I'll listen to you. I won't make it wrong. I'll give you 5 minutes. Just say whatever you want to say. Be mad. Be upset. Yeah. So I like that because again, it's a blend of masculine and feminine. Where it's like, okay, there's a structure, there's a discipline to it. I'm holding it for this amount of time, but then whatever that chaos of whatever you're experiencing in the middle, because and I'm not trying to say feminine or chaos, but it is. It's like it's the oceanic waves. You don't know how high or low they're going to come crashing in, and it's beautiful. It's a part of life, but it's this. I'm not going to say that joke. It's too soon for that. I was like, this is something that just happened. That is like that's too far, but it's one of those things where I like your approach to it because you get a handle on it.
Well, and I enjoy yours too, which in time wise that is a good segue to. I like to end every show, and I've talked to 2 other guests about this, and you and I have talked off camera about this, but I would like to start doing, even if it's monthly, quarterly, start off just a round table where we pick a subject about this stuff and we all kind of throw our 2 cents in. Because so one thing that I'll ask you, and while you're telling me that, I'll tell you something that I took away from today. So I always like to ask my guests at the end of the show, if you could bestow one piece of knowledge that's been helpful to you in different benchmarks of your life, what would it be? And then I also like to repeat back something that I took away from you today that I found to be helpful for me and that I will try and practice. And that is very much what you just repeated about, because the one thing I know in my life is that I don't know everything, and I never will, and that's the incredible part of the journey, right? That's exciting. I mean, how boring would life be if you knew everything already? Why get up tomorrow? So the thing I take away from you today, while you think about the question of something profound you could leave us with as far as knowledge or perhaps a saying that's been helpful, is taking your thoughts and reviewing them like a commercial. The reason that resonates for me is because to circle back to Jim Carrey, much like the cable guy, he memorized all these shows and all these things. I've been like that with commercials since I was a little kid. I would sit and watch commercials the same way and like repeat them in my brain. And if I hear somebody say things like, if someone says, "Oh," just in a certain way, that's it. Just the word "oh," I'm like, "Oh, O'Reilly's Auto Parts," right? Or like if somebody's like "real," and I'm like "comfortable jeans." Wranglers. Like I commercialize everything. So I really like that approach, and I'm certainly going to try it when maybe not even when a bad thought comes in my head, but when a good thought comes in my head too, and commercialize it and sit and watch that thought and kind of be with it. So that's what I took away from today. So I appreciate you sharing that piece of knowledge with me.
Of course.
But what is something else that you might say was helpful for you in different times?
What's coming through is, and I think this is helpful for me, but for everyone, is that I really do believe that we are evolving as a human race, and that sometimes one of the motivating factors of our evolution sometimes is fear, like that fear is not meant to be, run from, it's meant to kind of be faced, that it's in those shadows that you shine the light of awareness and attention, that is like usually the source of like that next step or the next piece of clarity or knowledge to go be courageous, change something about yourself, take a next step, have that tough conversation, whatever it is. And so really just being okay that fear is just a part of life. Like, to relate it to the mental health piece, it would be like if I was believing those thoughts and feeling those fears, as if those thoughts were real, but that was also an invitation for me to go into, okay, where is this thought coming from though? If I wanted to go detective mode on it, like what is the real source of this fear? So like a prime example would be if I had started, dating someone new and I had like an insecurity or something, come up, it's like I go deeper into it. I'm like, what is this? It's like, oh yeah, my mom left the home when I was, here we go, we went into the childhood stuff. My mom left the home when I was a kid, and it's like, this is just that old fear of an abandonment, trauma surfacing. So let me face that fear with like love, compassion, awareness until, I feel safe on a whole body level, like basically again, so this transcendence of fear. So I think that's a big one, is that a lot of times we'll use different tools, modalities, approaches. We're in the age of information where there's so many things out there that can help us develop our lives. And so it might even ask the question, like, if we have all this information to better our lives, why aren't more people doing it? And I think the answer is always fear. There's some underlying fear, of change. And so it's like facing that fear moment to moment is always going to be a component, no matter what the tool, the approach is that we're using to life to better ourselves and those around us.
Yeah, it's less comfortable to walk out of the chaos sometimes and into the comfort than it is to just sit there and be afraid.
Yeah. And for me, numbing out is not an option, right? To like desensitize myself from like what I'm feeling, right? Because like some people will do that, and there's no right or wrong. It's like for some people it can be binge drinking. Some people it could be marijuana. And there's nothing wrong with any of these things. It just depends on the relationship with it. If it's being used to like escape the fear or something going on the inside rather than facing it, I think that becomes a real challenge.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, Eric, very insightful. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Likewise, Corey.
So
likewise.
Thanks for coming on. We'll have to have you on again sometime.
Absolutely.
All right, good deal.
Thank you.